This video is going to be a demonstration on how to apply padding compound to pad a notepad. Here's a note to you as you're cutting your printed sheets for your notepad. These are not printed, but I'm using this as a demo. You'll have your sheets printed with your notepad layout and design on it. Before you take these to the cutter, you want to insert a piece of chipboard at the bottom of what's going to be each notepad. So if you have 100 sheets and you want notepads with 25 sheets each, you'll have 4 sheets of chipboard, and so you'll insert those every 25 sheets. You can use a Notepad Counter, which is a little thing you stick in the edge of the paper, and it measures the thickness of the paper. That's acceptable. You don't have to count out 25 sheets. So a piece of chipboard underneath of the notepad. So you put chipboard underneath each set of notepads that you've got. Then when you go to the cutter and you make your cuts, then you have chipboard at the bottom of all of your notepads. All right. That way you have just a little bit of a solid backing for that notepad, just like you have, yellow legal pads or whatnot. You have that heavy piece of board on the back, just gives you a little support as you're writing. So before you make your cut, insert your chipboard. So very first step you want to do is get your padding compound out, and we have 2 different types of padding compound. You can see there's padding compound, and then there is universal fan apart. Okay, they're both sitting next to each other on the table, but they're very different. Universal fan apart is a very thin liquid. It's used for NCR paper, which is like the carbonless forms. So if you have a form where you write on one sheet and you lift it up and it transfers onto the back sheet, those sheets stick together, right? That's what universal fan apart is used for. This will not work to create a regular standard notepad. It has a very specific purpose. Then we have padding compound. This has more the consistency of like Elmer's glue, and this is used to create your notepads. So this is what I'll be using for this little project here. Then you need a brush and your pages that you've printed and cut for your notepad. When you begin this process, you want to make sure that you jog these so that the sheets are all nicely lined up. If you pad your notepad like this with sheets all over the place, that's the way this padding compound will dry. It'll dry like glue, and your notepads will look just like this. They won't have nice neat edges. You'll have sheets all over the place. So that's step 1, is jogging these sheets so that your notepad has nice square edges, doesn't have sheets sticking all over the place. And you can use a wood block or something as a guide for you. And because I'm going to be applying this padding compound with a brush, I don't want to get padding compound all over the table surface. So I've got just this blue scrap piece of paper down on the table underneath of my papers that I'm going to pad. So I take my wooden block, set it there on the table, jog these by hand as best I can. And then as I set them down, I'm going to use that block to help give me a nice square edge. And I'm setting the block down and I'm pushing the papers into it. Just push, use your fingertips and push and make sure all those pages are nicely lined up. Once your pages are nicely lined up, you're ready to begin gluing. Now, when you do this, what happens when paper gets wet? It curls and waves, right? So if you were to apply this padding compound, which is a liquid, to the paper with no pressure, your pages are going to wave and wander, and you'll have a really funny looking notepad. So you want a nice compressed stack of paper before you apply this padding compound. So we've got these little bricks that are shrink wrapped that that is just enough weight for small quantities like this when you pad. If you have a larger quantity, let's say you want to pad 5,000 sheets, you would use something like this over here. This is a padding press. This gray unit down here on the floor, and this is used to clamp large amounts of paper together if you have large amounts that you need to pad. Since we're just doing a very small amount here, we're going to use a brick to hold that down, and that will be good for this purpose. So again, I've got scrap paper down here underneath. Maybe move those back a little bit so when I brush I don't get padding compound all over the table. And then I'm going to zoom in here so you can see what I'm doing. This is just a small 1-inch cheap brush. I'm going to dip it just a little bit into the padding compound. About that is all you're going to need. And then when you apply your padding compound, you're going to start in the middle and brush towards the outside, and then come back in the middle and brush to the other side. If you start on the outboard edge here and brush in, it's going to catch all that all that glue that's on the edge of the brush. You're going to have big runny drips over here on the edge. So you always want to start in the middle and brush to the outside. Start in the middle, brush to the other side. Start in the middle, brush to the outside. So you want to apply this glue pretty heavy. It's kind of an art more than a science. So I recommend that you apply the glue as thick as you can without it creating big drips. Okay? So as thick as you can without creating drips. And make sure you cover all of the edges. Again, brushing from the center outward. All the edges, and put a little bit more on there. And there it is, you've got nice even coverage. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see that better. Will it focus? No, it will not. There's a little better. So you can see it's nice and even. It's covering the whole thing. It's compressed well. And the last step you got to do here, once you have everything padded, is clean up your mess. So the lid to the padding compound goes back on, please, so it does not dry out. Then you take your brush over to the sink and you just use some water. This is water soluble, so turn the sink on and just kind of rub those bristles a little bit to get that padding compound out. Okay? That's all there is to it. This will take maybe a half an hour to an hour to dry. Kind of depends on the humidity of the room and whatnot. So I would say typically a half hour to an hour for it to dry. Once the padding compound is dry, you can remove your brick from the top, remove your sheet of paper from the bottom, and then use a padding knife to cut your individual notepads apart.